Hello, everyone. Welcome to FitRx. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Dennis. And as you know, this is a show about optimizing your health. I am all the time looking for the latest and greatest thing just to make me healthier, and then I try to take that information and share it with you. So, in my recent reading, I came across some people doing some really high doses of vitamin D to not only make one healthier, but actually cure some diseases. And so I came across a book titled "The Miraculous Cure and Prevention of All Diseases: What Doctors Never Learned." The author of this book is Jeff Bowles, and he is with us today to talk about this book and other books he's written, mostly about vitamin D. So, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks. It's nice to be here.
All right. So you have written several books in the realm of health and aging. You wrote one, I believe it was titled "The Miraculous Results of High Dose Vitamin D," and then the one that caught my eye was "The Miraculous Cure and Prevention of All Diseases: What Doctors Never Learned," and that title just caught my eye. I actually found this book because I had just read a book by, what was his name? Dr. Somerville. Are you familiar with him? Judson
I've heard,
Somerville.
yeah, I've heard that name.
Okay. So he wrote a book titled "The Optimal Dose." So it was
Yeah,
just,
yeah, I see his book on the best-selling list of Amazon. His book is always near mine, so I always see it in the top 100 here and there.
yeah. So I read that book, and he talked a lot about really high doses of vitamin D, and then that's what made me find your book, and you actually kind of go into more detail. And what I liked about your book is you actually mention, which we're going to talk about, but you mention also a little bit about magnesium, vitamin K2, and some other things which I believe are important.
Yeah,
Um,
boron, zinc, and beta carotene. It turns out there's 5 cofactors you need to take with vitamin D3.
yeah, yeah. So we'll get into all that.
Okay.
Um, and so I learned a lot from this, and I'm intrigued, and I'm, hoping to learn along with the listeners here, because I feel like, compared to most physicians out there, I'm pretty aggressive when it comes to vitamin D. I at least check it, which most most physicians aren't even checking a vitamin D level. Um, and I'm also encouraging people to take vitamin K2, and I also encourage magnesium. What was new to me with all this is just the much higher doses that than most people recommend, or most doctors recommend, and so we can get into all that. But before we do, just explain to our audience, a little bit about your background, how you came to writing books like this. I mean, what was your motivation into just studying about vitamin D and other vitamins, and writing these books?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess try and give you a short synopsis. But I started out, I come from a long line of doctors, mostly all educated at Stanford, and I was going to go to school to be a pre-med, and uh, I didn't like chemistry my first semester, so I switched to business and got an MBA at Northwestern in Chicago. And the year after I graduated, luckily for me, it shot up in rank from like number 8 to number 1. That was a nice bonus. And I got my CPA, and I made a bunch of money in real estate by the time I was 28, 29. And I guess uh, medicine was just in my blood. And I said, you know what? I've got enough money for a while. So I pretty much semi-retired out of real estate, went back to undergrad at age 26, 27, and was taking uh, biochem classes and biology classes. I started off in Bio 101, age 26, 27 maybe. And so bottom line, I mean, the years aren't exact. I was doing a little working while going to school, and so basically by the time I was 30, I was mostly in school full time. And I would take one class a semester to make sure I learned it quite well, and I'd set the curve in every class and made the uh, pre-meds like yourself made them angry because I brought the curve way up. And then I was like one class away from getting my biochem degree after about 5 or 6 years, and I just got tired of like the Krebs cycle memorization. You remember all that stuff?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh God, I was about to puke, and I said, "That's it. I can't take this. I quit." And I quit right in the middle of biochem too. And then I just went over to Northwestern Med School Library, spent like 10 years straight, 7 days a week, sometimes 12 hours a day, just reading abstracts out of medical journals and full articles, even old articles back from the 20s. I'd have to get out of the basement. My plan was, oh, I'm just going to find a cure for aging. I mean, I thought back then I thought I could do anything. And I just thought that would be kind of a fun thing to do. And I always go full bore on whatever I undertake back then. I was quite a workaholic. And doing all of this one day, I just was comparing the two diseases that look like programmed aging. Have you heard of progeria, where those kids turn into grandparents by age 12, like little old men?
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah. And then there's another rapid aging disease that kicks in when you're at age of puberty called Werner syndrome. But by the time they look normal as a teenager, but by the time they're like 40, they look like they're 85 or 90. I compared those two diseases, the DNA in both those cells. I go, aha, I've got it. And then that led to like a big long paper that I submitted to a medical journal that had like 4 or 5 Nobel Prize winners on their staff, and it was 7 times longer than their limit. And I had no credentials except a MBA and a CPA. And they accepted it for accelerated publication because they thought it was extremely exciting and of major importance. And that paper predicted if you suppressed luteinizing hormone, it would be a good treatment for Alzheimer's. And then so someone formed a company right around that time, and that idea had never been out in the public before. And they did get it out of my paper, I found out later, but they started a company and raised $50 million and were treating all these people for Alzheimer's by suppressing their luteinizing hormone with Lupron. And then they raised 50 million and they found out it worked in women in a phase 2 trial, and they were going public, but then it turns out it didn't work in men. And so the company collapsed. But that's how I got into medical research. Um, and then after that, I've also lift weights and stuff, and I had bad shoulders in my 30s. They kind of hurt. I read this article in Life Extension magazine that said people with achy joints tend to have low D3 levels, and they're helped with vitamin D3. So then I decided, oh, I'll take 4,000 a day, because they're saying back then the daily requirement or daily recommendation was 400 international units. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always like, let's go for it. I'll take 10 times that amount and see if I get some relief. And lo and behold, I was taking 4,000 a day, and those cracking shoulders that I had, they quit cracking. And that was, for me, that was a miracle. I could go back to weightlifting, and there was no problem. But it didn't really do much else for me, except, and I stayed at that dose for about 10 years. And but the one thing that happened during the 10 years is I never got a single cold. And then I used to get like 2 or 3 colds a year, like most people. And then after about 10 years of that, I finally convinced my dad to take like 2,000 units a day. And he was a doctor, didn't believe in vitamins like most doctors that you probably run into. Sure. And he used to say, oh, it just gives you expensive urine. And so I finally got him to take 2,000 a day. And then they finally tested his blood for vitamin D, which they hadn't been doing ever. And his vitamin D level came back at 30 nanograms per milliliter, which is the lowest end of the reference range. Mm-hmm. In the US, our reference range is 30 to 100. If you're in between there, you're considered normal. And so he was taking 2,000 and I was taking 4,000, and I thought, wow, maybe we have some kind of genetic problem absorbing D3, but if he's taking 2,000 and he's not barely boosting his D3 levels, I better take some more. So that's when I decided to do an experiment. I really didn't know much about it. I just said, I'm going to take 20,000 a day and see what happens.
Now, did you know what your level was taking 4,000 a day?
No, I
You never got it checked.
hadn't done any blood tests or anything, just kind of winging it. And
Okay.
then, but at the same time, so once I started this experiment, I went back into my research mode, like I had been at Northwestern Med School library, and I just started reading every abstract I could on vitamin D3. And I was starting to realize, whoa, this stuff is amazing. It turns out it's not a vitamin at all. It's actually a hormone. And it was just mislabeled as a vitamin because it was discovered after vitamin C. And the dogs they fed it to could get it from cod liver oil. And they raised the dogs indoors. And a definition of a vitamin is you can't make it in your body by yourself. You have to get it through your diet.
Mm-hmm.
So the dogs got by giving the dogs raised indoors cod liver oil, it prevented them from getting rickets, which is in humans we call it bow legs. Like
Mm-hmm.
their legs are all bowed out because their bones don't form properly. And they found cod liver oil prevents that in dogs. But later they found out if you just raise the dogs out in the sunlight, they didn't get rickets either. So it turns out D3 is not a vitamin, and they should probably change the name. I came up with an idea of like immunotropin because it's a hormone that controls your immune system and your tissue remodeling system. And one of the abstracts I saw in my research that some doctors were calling vitamin D3 was known as the bone and joint remodeling hormone. And that was helpful to know during my experiment of 20,000 a day, because after about 3 weeks, my shoulders just started killing me. And like it felt like someone hit me with a sledgehammer and in both shoulders. And those are the ones that were kind of injured before, and the clicking stopped when I took 4,000 a day. But once I was up to 20,000, oh, they were killing me after 3 weeks. And then I also had a hip click for about 20 years. That's a lot of athletes get them. I played a lot of soccer
Mm-hmm.
and rugby, and you do a lot of kicking. It's also called dancer's hip, where you get a bone spur on like your hip bone. And whenever the iliopsis tendon rubs over it, you get a clicking noise. And a lot of people have that. And once you get it, you really can't get rid of it. And I tried for 20 years. I had like deep tissue massage until I was bruised. That didn't work. And then I read up on it on the internet. It said the doctors would have had surgery for it. They would relax your iliopsis tendon, but didn't have that great an outcome, those surgeries. So I said, I'll pass on that. And then, like another week or two into this high dose D3 experiment, all of a sudden that hip started hurting like crazy. And like where I had that hip click. So there I am, I'm limping around and I can barely lift my arms. And most people would have quit. But since I'd read that it's the bone and joint remodeling hormone, I figured, you know what? I bet it's remodeling my problems. So I took ibuprofen to get through the pain, and I stuck with it. And then I had to stop. I had to stop D3 for a week or two just because the pain was so bad. And then I would start back up again. And boom! After about 2 months of this, my shoulders like completely resolved, and the hip click disappeared. It basically dissolved the bone spur on my hip. And then I've heard from other people since. Oh, so then I wrote a book about it. Oh, and then other things happened over a 1 year period. I had those yellow toenails you get. It's that fungus that gets under your toenails. Like
Uh-huh.
I picked that up in the gym when in my 20s, and I never could get rid of it. I tried all the home remedies like soaking it in apple cider vinegar. I even I was going to start taking that Lamisil, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
called. But there's a side effect in some people. It destroys your liver, which
Mm-hmm.
I thought didn't sound like a good gamble. And so I started taking that. After a couple of days, my tendons started hurting in my hands, And I said, this doesn't seem good. So I said, I'm not going to do that. And then what else? Then I read about the laser you could do on the yellow toenails. That was supposed to be good. And so I would actually file down my toenails with an emery board, and I'd go up on the roof and I'd do my own variation of it. I would get a magnifying glass and I'd focus it on the toenail back and forth. I do that for a long time. Nothing fixed my yellow toenails, but I've noticed about after 5 or 6 months of, I took even higher doses of vitamin D. I started after 3 months. I went up to 50,000 and later 75,000. And it was during this time I noticed, oh my God, my toenails are growing in clear. So basically, this D3 had had revved up my immune system enough where it just started killing off the yellow fungus under my toenails without any, without any other treatments. I didn't need to do anything except take vitamin D3. I had a friend he had the nastiest toenails, and he just started taking 20,000 a day, and then his toenail just started growing out like a brand new baby's toenail. I've got a picture of it on one of my websites, but I'll tell you about that later.
So you just started doing some basically self-experimentation on this higher dose vitamin D, and after that, is that when you wrote the book about?
Yeah. So I was reading all these abstracts over an entire year. There were like 70,000 at the time, and all of a sudden I'm becoming an expert on this. And after the first 3 months of taking 20,000 units a day, I finally had a blood test, and my vitamin D3 level came back at 125. So, and I've heard from, there's another doctor who read my book. He's in Germany, and he noticed that he's using it on his patients, and he noticed that you don't get the remodeling effect or cure for your diseases unless you get your blood level to 125 or higher. So the reference range keeps you with at a D3 level where it's not going to heal you or fix your diseases. So that's convenient for big pharma and the medical industry. But yeah, his name's Dr. Harold Shell. He wrote a book about how he uses D3 for glaucoma, and it's been translated into English. You can get that on Amazon. But he describes how he had a fistula, and he was so shocked because he was supposed to get surgery for it. That's like a opening between your bladder and your intestine or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the fluids go back and forth or whatever. But he was taking enough vitamin D3 to get his blood level above 125, and he noticed his fistula just closed up on its own. And then his other doctor friends were telling him, "Oh no, you need surgery." And so he wrote a book about it, and he uses it now to treat his patients for glaucoma. He quit using glaucoma medicine, and yeah. So basically, I did a full year of research. Another thing that happened to me was I had a subcutaneous cyst on my face. It wasn't that big, but it's like a little pimple that never pops. And that I had that for 20 years. The doctors couldn't do much. They said that it should be cut out and I'd have a scar. And another guy tried to just lance it and take the oil out, and just it was always annoying. And after about 9 months, I think I was taking about 9 months of this D3. I was taking about 80,000 a day at that point. I was just sitting there on my bed watching TV one day, and all of a sudden I felt my face, and there's this oil running down my face. I go, what? And I touched that cyst, and it was gone. I mean, it had just kind of ruptured on its own. And then I had a ganglion cyst on my wrist. Those are like little balloons that pop up. They used to call them Bible bumps because you could smash them with the Bible and they'd go away for a while. And that thing shrunk down to the size of a pea. And it's been like that ever since. Oh, and then so I've been taking D3 for another 10 years after the first 10 years, but much higher doses. And I've only had one cold in the last 20 years. And that was during a period of time when I decided to wash the D3 out of my system for a couple months. So if I hadn't done that, I could probably say I haven't had a cold in 20 years.
Okay.
And so I wrote the book after all these amazing things, and I wrote about it, and then put the book out there. All of a sudden, after a while, it became a bestseller, and then people started sending me emails about their high dose D3 experiments. And so I started to hear all sorts of crazy things that people had just experienced after taking high dose D3. Like a guy that was blind in one eye. I'll tell you that story later. But uh, so that was the second book that you read, is the result of my research for the first book, and then about another 9 years of hearing back from over 1,000 other people about how high dose D3 had affected them. And almost like always it's in a good way, and it's cured many diseases. It turns out high dose D3, Dr. Coimbra from Brazil, he's got a protocol. If you Google it, the Dr. Coimbra protocol, he gives any autoimmune patient, anyone suffering from any autoimmune disease, he gives them 1,000 international units per kilogram of body weight, and he has cured every autoimmune disease it's gone up against. So I mean, there's more than 100,000 people around the world that have cured themselves of MS, and that there's a bunch of Facebook groups that you can go talk to them. There's at least 100,000 people in the Facebook groups. You just type in Coimbra, D3, and multiple sclerosis, and you can talk to all these people who've cured themselves.
Yeah,
And
you have a ton of testimonials in the book. Well, let's talk a little bit more about vitamin D. As a clinician, like I mentioned earlier, I actually check vitamin D, which a lot of doctors don't even check. And man, just about everybody is vitamin D deficient, and we're talking less than 30. And I find some that are in the teens, or I've even had some less than 10, which is really, really low. So, in your research, why, as a society, are we so vitamin D deficient? Is it just lack of sun? Is it?
I think, well, it's like sunscreen. Uh, we probably weren't that D3 deficient up until the 1980s, and then our scientists, good scientists, warned us about how awful the sun was, and we must use sunscreen and wear a hat and stay out of the sun, and that is just causing the entire population's D3 levels to crash. I wrote one paper. It's on my website. It's titled "Overwhelming Proof That Vitamin D3 Deficiency Causes Most Human Diseases," and it shows how it's got graph after graph that shows almost every known disease that affects people under the age of 70 uh, has been skyrocketing since around 1980. Obviously we all know about obesity,
Mhm.
but asthma, autism, multiple sclerosis, all the cancers, pediatric cancers. I mean, I never used to hear of peanut allergies when I was a kid in the 70s, and now they're supposedly very common. Um, just everything's been skyrocketing, and it all goes back to this advice to stay out of the sun
Mhm.
and to use sunscreen. And I don't know if that was an accidental thing that the scientists did, because it. Do you want me to go into the conspiracy theory?
Go ahead.
All right. So Casimir Funk in the 1920s, he's the father of all our vitamins. He discovered vitamin D3 and also a weaker form called D2 that's made by plants. Like if you shine a sun lamp on mushrooms, you'll get vitamin D2. That's very similar to D3. It's just weaker, and it's not as safe for humans to take in high doses. I would recommend never take vitamin D2. D3 is the animal form that we make in our skin when we sit in the sun. And so basically, it was known back in the 1920s as the sunshine vitamin. Everybody started taking it. They were putting it in hot dogs and beer. This is all, you read this in my book, right?
Right. Uh huh.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the beginning of the book, is the history of this D3. and they were putting in everything. They were irradiating milk because that caused the milk to make vitamin D2, or maybe D3 since it came from a cow. But they'd shine it on mushrooms. So basically, then people were taking, back then they were taking, a lot of people were just taking 25 milligrams a day of vitamin D3 or vitamin D. It could have been a mix of D2 or D3. And the weird thing was, according to this one doctor who knew, he's passed away by now, but I read his statements. He said back then they were taking so much D3 that the hospitals in the 1920s became empty, and that the hospitals had been way overbuilt in the 1920s. They were trying to turn it into a profitable industry, the medical world, because most medicine had been done in people's houses up until that point. And they built all these hospitals, and we had way more hospital beds per person back then in the 20s than we do now. And they were expecting all these patients to make all this money, and the hospitals were empty. So what did modern medicine do back? Well, not modern. The 1920s scientists in medicine back then. What did they do? Did they just close up their hospitals? No. Instead, they recalibrated 25 milligrams of vitamin D, and they renamed it or remeasured it, and now it's 25 milligrams became 1 million international units. And they told everyone, do not take more than 400 units a day, or otherwise it's dangerous. And they had a few weird studies they pointed to where some animals were killed with high dose D3, but it turns out there is probably mixed with the various impurities. But and so the population, little by little, just was brainwashed into only taking 400 units a day, and that's just enough, they figured, to where it kept children from developing rickets in their legs. So if you gave babies 400 units a day, it would protect them from rickets, but it didn't put them in optimal health at all. But that was considered the limit, and that was promoted as the limit all the way up until about 10 years ago. That they were still saying that. It's just crazy. And then so the hospitals filled up again, and modern medicine and big pharma are back in
business.
money, back in business. And then they started using these UV lamps, sun lamps, back in the 40s and 50s and 30s. There's a bunch of ads in my book about, they called them health lamps and health bulbs, and they actually did work. And but little by little, the medical field referred to them as quack medical devices, and then people finally quit using them in the like late 60s and 70s, and you can see them on eBay now for sale. Antique quack medical devices, but they actually worked because they made vitamin D in your skin. And so then I guess people were sunbathing a lot, like me, in the 60s and 70s with my parents, and we never used any sunscreen. We used Coppertone and coconut oil or coconut butter, and got nice dark tans. It was always considered trendy to have a nice tan, and that's when they came up with sunscreen. So, and then all this entire time, the scientists or big pharma, they've been, always trying to outlaw high dose D3, and I got the whole history in my book. So medicine's been hostile to D3 since day one, and there's still a lot of doctors who don't even realize they've been brainwashed at med school. Like, oh, don't, if your blood level's over 50, that's that's D3 toxicity. I hear a lot of them say, and it turns out vitamin D3 is completely non-toxic. There's nothing toxic about D3. It really shouldn't be called D3 toxicity. The only danger of D3 is it can deplete your vitamin K2, because it uses up cofactors when it's doing all its wonderful work. And when it uses up too much of your K2, that leads to hypercalcemia, where you get too much calcium in your blood. And that's when they talk about D3 toxicity, they're really talking about calcium in your blood. So if you test your blood calcium when you're taking high doses and your calcium's normal, you've got nothing to worry about. Then the other thing they call D3 toxicity, and they get it confused. They assume it's associated with calcium, but it's not. It's magnesium deficiency. So vitamin D3 also uses up your magnesium really fast because it's using it to do repairs and whatever. And 80% of us are basically magnesium deficient, and it's not tested for by doctors because
Yeah.
they look at the blood test, which is
Right.
worthless.
Yeah, you can't really test for that. It's difficult.
The magnesium deficiency is in your tissues, so you
Right.
need a muscle biopsy if you really want to know.
Right.
And no one does that. But so the other negative effects of high dose D3 that they call D3 toxicity are really magnesium deficiency symptoms, which could be heart arrhythmias, blood pressure changes, dizziness, falls. They talk about a lot of falls in the elderly when they take high dose D3. What they're really seeing is magnesium deficiency symptoms.
And so we're taught in medical school that vitamin D is one of the fat soluble vitamins, and therefore your body can't get rid of excess amounts like it can something like a vitamin C.
That's
And
true.
so you're saying though that that's
I mean,
overblown
it
and
will,
not
yeah, it's no, it will stay in your body. So like, I know this one guy, I know of 2 cases of hypercalcemia out of the 1,000 people I've heard from. And these guys were idiots. They hadn't read my book. They weren't taking vitamin K2. One was taking 600,000 units a day over like 5 or 6 months to try and cure his ankylosing spondylitis. That's that hunchback disease
Yep.
where your bones crunch you up. And he was getting all this pain relief. He started at lower doses and went higher and higher. And then finally, he got hypercalcemia around 6 months in, taking 600,000 units a day. And nothing really happened to him except he got nauseous. He couldn't eat, was vomiting, lost a lot of weight, had to go in. The doctors told him, stop taking the vitamin D3. And he didn't even have to go on an IV. Some people have to dilute their blood, to the calcium out of their blood with an IV, but he didn't. And so he just stopped taking it. And so he had to wait and keep testing his blood for the D3 levels to go down. And it took like 6 weeks to get back down close to 100. Like he was way up there, like 300 or 400, something like
wow.
that. But so it's like a slow motion. Once you get the D3 in your fat, it's going to be there for a while. But if you stop the D3, it'll take like 6 weeks or
Yeah.
2 months to come down.
Well, let's talk about the increased immunity with healthy levels of D3, and that's appropriate nowadays with COVID going around. And I've seen some studies out there, and you really don't see this much on the media, but I've seen some about uh, uh, COVID mortality and low vitamin D. And so there's definitely a connection there, and there's a connection with vitamin D and immunity. And I think you mentioned in your book, I think I got this from there, that vitamin D is 10 times more effective at preventing flu than the vaccine. So
Right.
talk about just how vitamin D increases your immune system, and how that relates in today to COVID and those kinds of things.
Well, yeah. Let me just give you a slight intro to that. I wrote a book that's been banned by Amazon. It was available for like 2 weeks. It got all 5-star reviews. It's called the 16 Fascinating COVID-19 and Spanish Flu Mysteries Solved. And I came up with 16 like really crazy puzzle pieces that didn't make any sense about these pandemics and stuff. But once you solve the one factor that runs through all 16 of them, you find out, oh, it's vitamin D3 that answers all these 16 puzzles simultaneously. And what I've learned writing that book was the only people dying from COVID-19 are the people with the really low D3 levels, like 10, 15. And there's a direct correlation. The higher your D3 level, the less likely you are to die, and then the less severe your symptoms. And then one doctor, an emergency room doctor, tested all the COVID patients coming in to his hospital, more than 400, and he found not a single COVID patient was admitted that had a vitamin D3 level over 40. So anyone who had a D3 level over 40, which isn't that high, you're not going to end up in the hospital. And then the only people that died had levels under 30. And then there's another study that just came out in Spain in September. It was a randomized controlled, so it's like the doctors didn't know who was getting what. And they had a group of, did you hear about this one? The group of 50 that got high dose D3 and the other group of 26 that didn't. Did you hear about that study?
I don't think so.
Oh, all right, good. This will be good for you. Well, they gave both groups the treatment of the day, which they thought was hydrochloroquine and zinc. So they both groups got that.
Okay.
And then the 50 of them got high dose D3. I think they started off with 100,000 units, and then they were giving them like 50,000 every other day. And the 26, the control group got no D3. And what they found was in the group of 50, in the group of 26, 13 of them ended up in the intensive care unit. So these were people that were like just admitted to the hospital for COVID. So half of them got admitted to the ICU and 2 of them died. Now in the group of 50, guess how many ended up in the ICU?
I
0.
guess none.
0. And guess how many died? 0. Oh, I'm sorry. Not one person ended up in the ICU. Sorry, 1. And guess how many died? 0. So they had 2 deaths in the 26, 0 in the 50, 13 ICUs in the 26, and only 1 in the 50 that were getting high dose D3. And so that's a reduction in ICU admissions by 96%. That sounds significant to me. I think that's
I
outside
don't know
the.
this off the top of my head. Right. Yeah. So I don't know this off the top of my head without researching it, but what is the physiology behind
Oh,
the higher doses of vitamin D on
yeah, I was
increasing
just.
immunity? Do you know?
Yes, I do. I was just researching that recently. It's very interesting. In fact, I'll just tell you, Donald Trump made that miraculous recovery.
Yep.
He was taking 6 different things, and they were all blaming his recovery on Regeneron's antibodies. But they also mentioned he was taking vitamin D3, and I heard it just once in passing on Fox News. A doctor said, I have personal knowledge that he's taking 50,000 units of D3 every other day. And then I believe that is what really did it. And I've I have other anecdotal evidence that that high dose. I mean, you got that Spanish study right there. I mean, but maybe the combo of the antibodies and the D3. But you can actually use high dose vitamin D3 as a treatment for COVID if you catch it. Just start taking 50,000 a day, and it should knock it out within a few days. And the way it works is basically we all have 2 major adaptive immune systems that respond to novel viruses. The first one is your T cells, your killer T cells that are made by your
Hmm.
thymus. And that's the best defense. And so they're out there looking at all your cells. If they detect a virus infected cell and they're working properly, they'll latch onto it. Within an hour and a half, they'll kill it. So if your immune system's in good shape, like when you're taking high dose D3 like me, your killer T cells are just out of control. And that's why I've only had 1 cold in 20 years. And I got a website where you can search through 1,000 different high dose D3 testimonials at jefftbowles.com. I got can D3 cure your disease? It's a search engine you can use. And you just type in colds and you'll see it's a common story. Everybody says, I haven't been sick in 5 years, this and that. Everyone's sick around me. I don't get sick. Yeah, so it's like when you've got a lot of D3 in your system, your killer T cells, that's actually known as the CD8 cell that's made by your thymus. Those things are like those are jacked up and ready to go. And it turns out when a CD8 or killer T cell uh, uh, is activated by finding an infected, uh, a viral infected cell in your body, that's when it displays its vitamin D receptors. And it needs those D receptors to be uh, uh, joined to a vitamin D molecule. There's a why evolution did it this way. As a whole different story, which I explain in my first book, so I won't get into that. But so if the vitamin D is like high at high levels in your blood, as soon as that killer T cell displays its D3 receptors, boom, the D3 is there, and that helps coordinate 500 genes at least in the killer T cell that is involved in figuring out how to kill this virus infected cell. So your killer T cells can knock stuff out in an hour and a half. Now, if you don't have enough D3 and it's not working right, it's not going to do it as fast. It might not do it at all. Then you got your backup system, which is your B cells that make antibodies, and they do it inside your bone marrow. And what happens is your thymus makes another set of cells called CD4 that gets like a sample of the virus and takes it down into your bones and presents it to the B cells in your bone marrow. So this is a lengthy process. And then your bone marrow cells have to, they call it B cells because it comes from your bone marrow. I like to think of it as your backup immune system. And then it takes 5 to 30 days to make those antibodies. And also the B cells have the same thing. They have vitamin D receptors that need to be activated for them to do their work properly. So when you have a lot of vitamin D in there, it basically revs up your immune system. It gives your immune system glasses. Like your immune system doesn't have eyes, so it's looking at stuff like, is this good or bad? Should I kill it or let it go? So, when it's out of focus, it can't see right. It's going to attack some of your good tissues. You get that. And the things that attack your good tissues are actually CD8 cells. Those are what's attacking your intestines when you've got Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. They're like renegade killer T cells that are attacking the wrong stuff. That's why, and then that happens in myasthenia gravis. And in fact, this kind of a primitive medical procedure they use to treat myasthenia gravis is they cut out your thymus, but that doesn't sound too smart. And then, but so high doses of D3 basically tunes your immune system up so it sees everything properly. So it stops it, and it's actually a cure for all autoimmune diseases. Did I mention Dr. Coimbra yet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah. And then, I mean, and there's like it's, you can look up Dr. Coimbra protocol and see before and after pictures. It cures lupus, it cures psoriasis. He's got before and after pictures, vitiligo, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, MS, it's the whole list. And so basically,
spell his name.
Oh yeah, it's
Spell his name in case listeners want to do that.
Yeah, it's Dr. Coimbra, Coimbra. He's got lots of YouTube videos. You can just look up Dr. Coimbra protocol on Google. I use Bing. Google censors too much medical information these days. You can do him on Facebook, and you'll find him many different ways. And there's a lot of before and after pictures now. He's got a bunch of doctors working with him all over the world. The Coimbra elves, I call them. But so basically, it tunes up your immune system to also attack the bad actors that before it might not have seen, like the fungus under my toenails. Those are the D3 revs up your immune system. It makes it so it can see well, and it also kills off cancer cells before they can spread or replicate into a much bigger problem. It kills off any infections. So, all right, so I'll leave it at that because I know you got something to say there.
No, you're fine. So, And we don't have time to get into everything, but you do mention all a lot of benefits of vitamin D. We've touched on some, but before we move on to some of the cofactors, which I do want to get into briefly, I want to get into just some of the practical applications of using vitamin D. As a physician, I'm going to recommend people get a baseline level just to
Oh
use
yeah,
that as
that's
their
that's the
starting
smart
term.
thing to do. I didn't do it that way.
Yeah. And I check that. Again, a lot of physicians don't even check that. Matter of fact, most don't even check that. I think I'm in the minority. But so I'm going to recommend to listeners, if you're interested in doing this, to get a baseline level number one. So with that, so once you get a baseline level, I mean, give us some recommendations on just daily dosing, and then again we're going to get into the other cofactors here in a minute. But just for vitamin D, give us some recommendations on daily dosing.
All right. Well, there's one doctor in Germany. He has his patients take 100,000 units a day for 7 days, and then he puts them down on a maintenance dose of 10 or 20,000 a day. And he actually wrote his book, and it's been translated into English, and you can get it on Amazon. It's called Healthy in 7 Days. That's one way you could do it. The way I did it
Now,
was I just
now
went right.
is
Oh,
this for people who are really really low, like they're less than 30 or even in the teens, or
I
is he
don't.
doing that for
I
everybody?
he just does it for everybody. It's like fill the tank, and then he wants people to get their blood levels up to like 90 to 100 for the rest of their life.
Okay.
And then but that's one way to do it. The way I did it, I just started taking 20, 25,000 a day, and 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 I went for 3 months, and all this stuff happened at that level. And you got to adjust it for your weight. I was taking that when I weighed about 180, 190 pounds, but everyone should adjust it for their weight unless they're going to. But if you're doing blood testing, it's much more precise. Um, and then after you've been doing it for a while, you should test your blood calcium along with the D3. In fact, the D3 is almost irrelevant as long as it's high enough. You just have to watch your calcium. And then some people, there are some people have problems right off the bat when they take high doses of D3. In fact, I got an email from a man whose woman was doing, or his woman, whose wife was taking that 100,000 a day, and but under the other doctor, and he said, "Oh my God, my wife has this horrible heart palpitations, and they put her in the emergency room. The doctors want to give her a pacemaker." And I said, "No, don't do that." I said, just stop the D3. What's going on now is she's magnesium deficient, like most people are, and the high dose D3 is really aggravating the underlying magnesium deficiency, and that's causing the arrhythmia. So just start dosing her on magnesium at least 2 or 3 times a day. You can't do it all at once or you get diarrhea, so you have to take it throughout the day. Do it for a week or two, and then she can take the D3 again. So he did that, and she was fine and avoided heart surgery. So that's one. So most people, if they have any problem initially with high dose D3, it means they're magnesium deficient, and that can show up. There's I would say vitamin D3 deficiency is involved with causing about 75% of most diseases of humans. And I would say magnesium deficiency accounts for about 20% more. And a lot of the possibilities you can get, but D3 can cause magnesium deficiency aggravation. I've heard of one guy, he was taking 20,000 a day to cure his plantar fasciitis, and D3 will knock that out in 2 weeks. When people limp around for years, and you tell them about that, they're like, "Oh, that's BS." They don't believe it, and then they do it, and they feel stupid. But so one guy was taking 20,000 a day for his plantar fasciitis, and he had a panic attack for the first time in his life. And that's another symptom of D3 magnesium deficiency, anxiety, blood pressure changes. There's a huge list. It's in my book. And then the most severe cases is one guy started hallucinating and got dizzy and was falling down. He had to close his business for a while, and the doctors couldn't diagnose him. So if you have any problems in the beginning taking high dose D3, it means you're aggravating your magnesium deficiency, and you need to
Yeah.
stop the D3 and load up on magnesium before you do it again.
And I agree. Yeah, and I agree with you. Most people are magnesium deficient, and you're exactly right. You can't really test that, and so it's hard to know. I usually recommend about 400 milligrams of magnesium every night. What do you recommend, and do you recommend a specific form of magnesium? There's a lot of different forms out there.
Yeah, I was taking all during the high dose D3. I was always taking like 250 or 500 milligrams of magnesium a day, and I thought that was enough. And that wasn't, because the high dose D3, it eats it up. So, um, and I had about 8 years into my high dose D3 experiment, I got kind of a frozen shoulder, and I just couldn't get rid of it. And I thought the D3 it wasn't working for some reason, and I came across, it turns out, to cure tendonitis or frozen shoulders, that's also a symptom of magnesium deficiency. So even though I was taking like 400 a day, it wasn't enough with the amount of D3 I was taking. So for about a year, I started taking 500 milligrams twice a day, plus some magnesium threonate. That gets into your brain and helps with any uh, mental issues. I don't have any mental issues except that I'm crazy. um, crazy about medicine. But like some people that have anxiety or agoraphobia, like there's all sorts of uh, weird mental conditions that are associated with magnesium deficiency, like most of them, like psychosis, just you name it. There's a long list in my book. And the magnesium threonate, that passes the blood-brain barrier. So if you got any of those anxiety issues, you want to take that also along with regular magnesium. But I like magnesium that stays in your blood a long time. So Life Extension Foundation sells a extended release magnesium, and I think other people sell it too. And that has, like, some of it's coated so it doesn't get released for a little bit later. And so that stays in your blood for 6 hours, and it reduces your chance of getting diarrhea, because the number one ingredient in laxatives is magnesium. That's what you drink before you
Right.
have your colonoscopy, if you've ever done that. But so you want to spread that out during the day. So that's why I take magnesium, extended release magnesium, twice a day. So
Okay.
that
Okay.
contains magnesium citrate, and then another one, I forgot that's the one that's encapsulated. But just plain old magnesium, what is it, oxide or something? That's not that good.
That's one. Yep.
It
Yep.
just
Yep.
that one can give you diarrhea a lot easier than the others. And then Epsom salt is basically
So
pure magnesium.
right. Right. Yeah. Um, you mentioned in your book, and I had that at the first, that the five deadly deficiencies of the modern age are vitamin D3, which we talked about, magnesium. Next on the list is vitamin K2, which is very important, and I recommend anybody take that with vitamin D. And I'm still not doing like super high doses of vitamin D yet, but so why is that important to take along with the vitamin D?
Vitamin K2 it basically recharges this hormone called osteocalcin. And what osteocalcin does is it just sits around, and when there's calcium in your blood, it grabs it. When it's charged up with K2, it grabs the calcium out of your blood and puts it back in your bones. And so it doesn't accumulate in your soft tissues. And if you're the vitamin D3 uses up your vitamin K2 doing all its handiwork. And when you've exhausted your K2, osteocalcin works in reverse, and it takes calcium out of your bones and puts it in your blood. So if you take a lot of D3 for a long time, it eats up your K2 just like it eats up magnesium, and that's how you get hypercalcemia. And that's what doctors scare you with, like, oh, you're going to calcify your kidneys and this and that. But it's really very rare. Even people taking high doses of D3, like 50,000 a day, I've never heard of hypercalcemia. You can get kidney stones. I've heard of people taking 50,000 a day of D3 and no K2. I've heard of 2 cases after 6 months. They both got kidney stones, but one had it run in their family. And then if you take really high doses of D3 with no K2, you can get that hypercalcemia. I do know of a guy taking 1 million international units a day every day to treat his primary progressive multiple sclerosis, but he takes a lot of K2 and a lot of magnesium, and his calcium always tests normal. And he actually fought the heavyweight champion of the world. He's an ex heavyweight boxer. Zoran, I forgot his last name. It'll come to me. But yeah, so K2 is very important. But even if you're taking 20,000 a day, you don't really need the K2 for the hypercalcemia risk. If you're taking 50,000 a day, you'd want to take a K2 to avoid kidney stone risk. Kidney stones aren't that, they're painful. They're not that dangerous, but it's not fun to get them. And if you're taking higher than 50,000, you want K2 to avoid hypercalcemia. And then the other thing, a great thing about K2 is it decalcifies your soft tissues, and it helps with osteoporosis because it's putting calcium back in your bones. And in Japan, they gave people 45 milligrams a day for osteoporosis, and it worked quite well. And then it can also, if you've got calcified arteries and veins, which many people do when they're older, you can actually go on a course of high dose K2 and some D3, and over like 2 or 3 month period, it'll decalcify your veins and arteries. But 45 milligrams, they usually measure K2 in micrograms, and you should take 400 micrograms of K2 with every 10,000 units of D3. But if you're decalcifying your arteries and veins, you can take 45,000 micrograms a day or 3 times a day. There's really no toxicity to K2. And that's actually sounds like a lot, but it's the same as saying 45 milligrams.
Okay. So it sounds like if somebody is a little leary to
There's
this high dose of vitamin D.
Wait, one last really cool thing about vitamin K2 is there was a guy named Dr. Weston Price. He went around, he was a dentist, and he traveled the world trying to figure out why the English had such bad teeth and other Europeans. And he went to all these island countries, like natives on islands, and they all had perfect teeth. They never brushed their teeth or flossed. And everyone in Europe had all these crooked teeth, and he couldn't figure out why. So he figured out there was something, he called it factor X, that they got from their diet, and it's from the animal products. The animals they raised, they would eat spring and summer grass instead of, in Europe, they had switched to feeding animals like corn and wheat or whatever. But it's the animals that ate the summer grass. It turns out factor X is vitamin K2, and so you get milk and butter from cows that eat summer grass, and it's like an orange color. That's because it's full of vitamin K2. And it turns out these islanders, they had enough K2 in their diet where the kids, their jawbones would grow larger to the size they're supposed to be. But if you're K2 deficient, your jawbone as a kid does not grow big enough. So when the teeth come in, they come in all crooked and crowded, and that's why you need braces. So if everyone gives their kids K2 when they're young, when their teeth are coming in, you probably will never need braces.
Interesting.
So that's a nice little benefit of K2.
So I was going to ask if somebody...
that's the secret of grass-fed beef. That's why it's healthy for you.
Yeah, I've read that. So if someone is leery to take these higher doses of vitamin D, worried about some kind of side effect, as long as they're taking vitamin K2, I mean, they probably have nothing to worry about. Correct?
K2 and magnesium, yeah.
Okay.
The first first negative effects you're going to get is almost always going to be magnesium deficiency symptoms. And some of them are like really weird, like your legs swell up or when you're sitting down. There's a bunch of weird ones. You got to look at my book. It's like 2 pages of symptoms,
Gotcha.
different
Okay.
symptoms.
Okay. Well, so
The-
the next one that you mentioned, as far as the deficiencies of the modern age, is boron. So it's a cofactor for a vitamin D. So just briefly talk about boron and what we can do to correct that.
yeah, I looked up boron deficiency in humans, and I could barely find. I looked up D3 and what are all the cofactors. Boron was one of them, and I started looking up boron deficiency, and it only refers to plants almost. There's almost no data on humans and boron deficiency. It's like almost completely not researched. Except there was this one guy named Max Nedham, I think is his name, something like that. And he was a plant botanist in England. He moved to Australia to study plants and their boron deficiency, and he noticed he got arthritis. And he'd never had it before, never in his family. And so he got the idea that boron deficiency caused arthritis. So he started doing studies on it. And he started taking borax, which is a laundry detergent that makes your clothes whiter, but it's basically pure boron. And he started taking 1/8 a teaspoon of that twice a day, and he noticed it cured his arthritis in about like a couple months. And then he just started doing research. He went all over the world and tested boron in the soils, and he discovered that in any lands where the boron level is low, there's like 70% of the humans might have arthritis, and the dogs have it. And then places where boron levels are high in the soil, like there's only 5% incident of arthritis, and the dogs don't get arthritic. So, and then he did some tests on a few people, and it was got great results. And that's I mentioned those. Those are like the only experiments ever done with boron that I can tell. And then he finally passed. Oh, and then he started selling borax. He put it in pills and was selling it to everyone in Australia, and it was just growing by word of mouth. And before you know it, he's like selling like 4,000 bottles a month in Australia. And he approached a pharmaceutical company and said, "Hey, you want to market this, and we'll make a lot of money?" They looked into it and said, "Oh, we can't patent it." And they told the government, and then the government outlawed borax. So,
Hmm.
but so apparently D3 is using up your boron as well.
Okay.
And like any other cofactor. And I had a real old German Shepherd that she weighed 120 pounds. And I started giving her boron. And within, I didn't even notice it, but after 2 or 3 months, she'd lost like 30 or 40 pounds. She got down to 80 or 90 without, and and in the beginning, she had like a lot more energy. And I looked into it, and it turns out boron also somehow affects your insulin sensitivity. So
Hmm.
in some people, it might help for weight loss.
Is there a recommended amount of boron, or if somebody takes a multivitamin, would they get enough boron in that?
No, yeah. As usual, the medical authorities just say, well, 3 milligrams a day won't be bad. It is safe,
Hmm.
but they don't really look into like what's optimal. And um, and then they talk about, oh, it could be careful, it could be toxic at higher doses. But I looked into it, and the lethal dose of boron is 50 grams. So if you ate 50 grams of it, it would kill you. But that sounds scary, but table salt, the lethal dose of table salt is 25 grams. So I'm not too scared of boron.
Hmm.
So I was taking like 30 milligrams twice a day. So that'd be like, they want you to take one pill of 3 milligrams. So I was taking 10 of those twice a day.
Oh my gosh.
Or you could switch to borax laundry detergent if you want to save money. You do your own research. It says on the box, not for human consumption or whatever, uh, but no, that's what a lot of people take borax if you want to save money, but that's up to you. You can always buy the vitamins and spend a lot more money.
Sure. Okay. Um, so last thing you talk about is zinc as another cofactor for vitamin D. I know of zinc just in aiding in the immune system, actually helping with the sex hormones like testosterone. But talk about zinc and why you mentioned it in the book.
Well, it turns out our soils are zinc deficient too. So the reason we all have all these deficiencies is because our soils are depleted of magnesium, boron, and zinc over the years that the farming practices they don't grow food for proper nutrition. Farmers like plants that grow really fast into nice big looking uh, nice looking fruits and vegetables, but they don't really monitor the nutrient content. You're better off eating organic that looks kind of nasty, but that'll have more nutrients for you. So basically the entire agricultural soil is deficient in these minerals. Zinc is one of them, and we're probably all zinc deficient and we don't realize it. And the reason I say that is because your thymus is pretty big when you're young, and that's what makes your killer T cells. And that shrinks. It starts shrinking like as a teenager, and it just keeps shrinking and shrinking. And by the time you're 65, your thymus is like 1/6 the size it used to be. And at that point, many people can't even make new T cells when challenged with a new virus, and that's why another reason people's older people's immune systems are bad, and that's why zinc is good for your immune system. It turns out they gave zinc and melatonin, or zinc and arginine, either or. And the third one is zinc and quercetin. You can use any one of those with zinc, but they're giving it to elderly mice, and they found out it rejuvenated their thymus gland and it grew back. So they always thought the thymus involution or shrinkage was caused by aging, but it seems more likely it's caused by a depletion of our zinc pools over time. And so that's one thing that we definitely need to take more of. They tell us, they tell you, oh, don't 50 milligrams of zinc is safe. But there's people that in certain areas of the world that eat a lot more zinc than that and have no problems. So I take 200 milligrams of zinc a day. And
Oh
I
wow.
think the best one, according to my vitamin guy, I didn't research it much, but I got a guy that's a vitamin expert. He said zinc picolinate
Hmm.
is the one that's most absorbable. And so if you are zinc deficient, you get, so like if you take a lot of D3 over time, you're going to get zinc deficiency symptoms. And that happened to me after about 4 or 5, now maybe about 7 or 8 years of high dose D3. I got this like patch of an alopecia on the back of my head, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I'm like putting Rogaine on it, and I'm like, why is this happening? I'm taking melatonin, which makes your hair grow, but it didn't work on that patch. And I started looking up zinc deficiency symptoms. One of them is alopecia. And then I saw there's an internet site that shows a woman who was zinc deficient who had a same alopecia patch on the back of her head. It's got a before and after picture. And after she was on zinc for like 7, 8 months, that her hair grew back completely fine. And what else? Like cracked lips. There's a number of symptoms that it's in my book. But I mean, they're not as dramatic as the magnesium deficiency symptoms, but it's something you want to look out for. So if you're taking D3, you should supplement with all these 4 cofactors. And then there's a final one is vitamin A is a cofactor, but you don't want to take the retinol form. That is too strong. And actually, high doses of retinol will interfere with vitamin D3's health benefits. And it turns out vitamin D3 protects against almost all cancers except in people that take high doses of retinol, um, because that negates the anti-cancer effects of vitamin D. And according to Dr. Who did that? I think it was Dr. Mercola figured that out. He was looking at some studies.
Hmm.
He used to recommend vitamin A, and he said, "Don't take vitamin A. It's not good for you. Instead, take beta carotene, because that won't convert to vitamin A unless your body needs it." So that would be the final cofactor. And then what else? Oh, there's in the book that you read, I got a chapter on cancer, and there's a number of people. There's a woman who had terminal pancreatic cancer, an 85-year-old Iranian woman. They sent her home to die, and they checked on her 9 months later, and she said, "I've never felt better in my life." And they looked in her pancreas, and her tumors were like shrinking, and she was going into remission. They said, "Well, what are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I've been taking 10 of these pills a day that my homeopath told me to take." Turns out the homeopath, I think, told her only to take one pill a day, but so she was accidentally taking 50,000 units a day of vitamin D3. And there's another case in there. It's anecdotal about a young woman with terminal ovarian cancer who claims she just started at her brother's advice. She went home to die, and at her brother's advice, as a last ditch attempt, started taking 50,000 units of D3 a day, and she went into complete remission. So that's another interesting aspect I need to study.
Well, very good. Well, my take-home message from all of this is just to be much more aggressive about taking vitamin D and the cofactors. And since reading this in Dr. Somerville's book, I realized that I'm not being aggressive enough as a physician in recommending vitamin D. For myself, I don't take any in the summer, and in the winter, I would take 5,000 units a day.
Ah,
But after learning all this, I realized it's a little of nothing, and so I have just since reading this, I have started taking more personally. I've already I had already been on magnesium, and I take K2 along with my vitamin D. So I guess I would recommend for people, number one, know what your vitamin D levels are. So get a baseline, and probably start taking some higher doses of vitamin D. And I think as long as you're taking these cofactors, you're probably going to be fine. And monitor it. Work with your physician. If you're working with somebody like me, I'm more than open to monitor those levels, but monitor your levels over time so you know where you're at. And did you say, do you like levels around 100? Is there a level
yeah,
that you
yeah.
like?
Let me give you a little more uh, perspective on that. So, yeah, at 190 to 100 is great for permanent health for the rest of your life. But if you want to like cure things, you can cure allergies. I cured my allergies, seasonal allergies. It took like 2 years to completely cure them. Uh, um, but basically, you need to have blood levels of 125 to 150 to actually cure autoimmune diseases or higher. Um, I know of one woman who has Crohn's disease. She had it for 50 years, and she got her blood levels up to 150. In England, the doctor said, "Stop it, it's toxic, it's toxic." But that cured her Crohn's 50 years. And then, so she listened to them, and her blood level came down to 100, and her Crohn's came back at 100. So some people need a higher dose, like even a higher level up to 150. Now, it shouldn't sound too scary. They test the blood of lifeguards in the summer, like in Florida, and they regularly test out at 125. So it's not like you're doing anything totally crazy. You're boosting your blood levels up to lifeguard levels on the beach. And then as far as a dosing goes, just they renamed it 1 million international units for a reason, so you're talking about big numbers and it sounds scary. So like, oh, 5,000 sounds scary. I thought 4,000 sounds scary when they were saying the recommended maximum dose per day is 400.
Yeah.
You think, oh, I'm doing 4,000. Well, it turns out Dr. Hollick, he discovered vitamin D. He's like the leading researcher on it. He did a little test with people. He had them sit in the sun just long enough till their skin turned pink, and the pinkness went away after 24 hours. So that would be like a half-hour sunbathing. He called that one erythmal dose. So I guess it varies per person in different people, like how much sun you need to get to that. And so he found out one erythmal dose, or basically a half-hour sunbathing, caused your skin to generate around 20,000 international units. So 20,000 units is the same as sunbathing for a half hour. So that should make it sound a little less scary.
Sure. Okay.
Oh,
And
and that's sunbathing uh, at at 48 degrees north. So that's like at the border of Canada and the U.S. So it also you can make that much in the weak sun of Finland. But when you get further south, like in the Florida sun, it's going to make uh, that stronger sun will make more D3 in your skin than
perfect.
if you're up north.
Well, as far as the type or the brand of vitamins, many of my patients know I recommend Thorne. Um, I don't know if you use Thorne, but I use Thorne, and so the highest they're going to have, like most people, is going to be 10,000 units of vitamin D. So obviously, you're going to have to take multiple ones of that if you're going to do the higher doses. And in my show notes, I'll put a link to Thorne with my physician number on there. So if you want to use that to order some. Um, so how can people find you?
Well, you can go to my website. It's got a lot of neat articles about people who've cured various diseases. It's got case studies. It's got like 60 different blog posts. Like, uh, it's got one like vitamin high dose D3 cures acne when Accutane does not. Um, a woman cures myasthenia gravis with 100,000 units of D3 a day. One doctor cured his ulcerative colitis. An Italian heart surgeon, the drugs didn't work, and he took 100,000 a day for 10 months, and it cured it. And it's got that's a blog post with his discussion. And then there's got the search engine with like a thousand self-reported case studies. So you can just pop whatever condition you've got, you can pop it into the search engine there, and you can read page after page of.
And what is that website? Can you?
It's Jeff T Bowles, BOWLES.com. So it's just one big, there's no spaces, just Jeff T Bowles.
Okay,
That's my middle initial.
and I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
And
And
then
then I've got books on Amazon. You can just search Jeff Bowles on Amazon, and you might want, hey, Hanky. Oh, I've got a dog here. Hey, Hanky, no. That's my little, I actually cloned my dog. He passed away a year and a half. He's the first cloned dog in the St. Louis area. But yeah, so yeah, you can get the books on Amazon. Now I'm giving away a free book for anyone that wants it. It was banned by Amazon, but it's got all 5-star reviews, but it violated CDC guidelines. They didn't want anyone contradicting the CDC, which are a bunch of idiots. Sorry. But I will email it to you as a PDF file if you send it. You can go to jefftbowles.com, look at the first blog post. It talks about this book. It gives you 2 sample chapters, and it gives you my email address where you can email me, and I'll send you a free copy of the PDF for you to share it with all your friends. It's titled 16 Fascinating COVID-19 and Spanish Flu Mysteries Solved. And once you read that, you're going to know way more than Dr. Fauci about how to handle COVID-19. And you can throw your mask in the garbage and go around, lick doorknobs, and not worry at all.
Very nice. All right. So I always end my interviews by asking my guest if you could give us one health tip that can make us healthier today. Obviously, we're talking about vitamins, and it can be that or something else. But what would you tell the listeners if you just had to say one tip that can make us healthier?
Well, you can get all this and stuff out of my books. I'll give you one that's not in my books, but haven't been to the dentist in 20 years, and I haven't had I don't floss anymore, and I used to have bleeding gums, receding gums, toothaches, cavities, and after I started taking D3 and K2 and one other substance, I never had to go to the dentist again, and I don't think you will either. It's called CoQ10. I'm sure you know about it, Doc.
Mm-hmm.
But it's if you look on the internet, type in uh, type in teeth and gums and CoQ10, you'll see it's like a miracle substance. If you ever have a gum ache or toothache, bite a gel cap of CoQ10, rub it on that for until it goes away. Might take about a week. And then if you're taking oral CoQ10 along with your D3 and K2, you can say goodbye to the dentist.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. Well, that sounds good.
That's a nice health tip.
Yeah, that is. Well, thank you, Jeff, for enlightening us on vitamin D and all the other cofactors. And we just appreciate your time.
Did we go over 30 minutes?
We did, but that's okay. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for listening, and we will visit with you all next time.